Welcome to another episode of The Horrific Podcast. We're two musicians who used to play in a band together and share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. If you haven't seen the movie we're talking about, then don't worry. The first half of the episode will be pretty high level and spoiler free, and then we'll play a warning before we start talking about any major plot twists in the ending. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. We're just plowing right through October.
We are, man. It's going by so fast.
I know, it's crazy. This whole year has gone by super fast, but
yeah.
Old people always say that. And now I'm like, whoa, it's so true. And they've just been like, yeah, we've been telling you this the whole time, you idiot.
Yeah, no shit, dumbass.
Yeah. But I feel like, been using some of my time between jobs productively in that I put another short story up on the website.
You did?
Yeah. Yesterday. So it's out there and available for reading. And it was written to be kind of specifically scary to Sarah and Katie. Because people always say, write what you know. So that's kind of what I did. But then I made it scarier than normal.
Yeah. Oh, I know Katie's gonna like it. I don't know about Sarah. If I ever want to scare Katie, I just tell her I'm pregnant.
Is that because she's seen Junior?
No, it's kind of like she's like, oh, I'm sick and tired of you being a terrible husband. I'm gonna leave you, and I pulled the pregnant card, and then she can't leave.
So it's like a trap.
Yeah,
trapped her.
But she gets super scared about that.
Yeah, smart.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no way to prevent it, though, so it's just a matter of time.
That's true.
Yeah. So anyway, today we are here to talk about Friday the 13th Part 2, and we're continuing what has kind of become, I guess, the theme of this October, which is 80s slasher movies.
Part 2s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last time we talked about Halloween 2. This time we're talking about Friday the 13th Part 2. And then the next one is going to be Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do another sequel.
Right.
For one of those movies. But it's not going to be from the 80s. And that's all I'm going to say. I'll leave the rest up to the listener's imagination.
Oh, I so want to tell them, but I won't.
Good. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Just 1 year after the original made everyone rethink their plans for attending summer camp, Friday the 13th Part 2 was released in 1981. The film was produced by Steve Miner, and the story picks up 5 years after the events in Part 1. The story includes a fresh crop of summer camp counselors who are in training near the infamous Crystal Lake and end up being terrorized by a mysterious killer. The movie was made on a budget of $1.25 million and grossed over $21 million, which is around a third of what the original made. Friday the 13th Part 2 can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon.
Very good. I almost did it on the AMC app again, but then I realized that when you came up, that there were some scenes that were cut, and so I was like, oh, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. Well, cool. So, I assume you did a little reading about this movie?
Yep.
And what did you learn?
Good. So I learned a couple things. So Adrienne King, who plays Alice. Alice is that character who survived the last movie, and she was at the beginning of this one. She was actually supposed to have a bigger role, but they changed her mind because she ended up getting like a super obsessive stalker who actually eventually broke into her house.
Oh, no way.
It was super sketchy, and so that's why they cut it to just the cameo, and which I thought was kind of crazy in itself, because we know that Friday the 13th is an iconic horror movie.
Yeah.
But I guess we didn't really think about it being that iconic. I guess it doesn't have to reach a certain level before fans become obsessive. But anyway, so that was something kind of crazy. Another thing I learned, and it's kind of debated on, they talk about the influence of The Mask for Jason. the pillowcase with the one hole cut out. A lot of people say that that's it was directly influenced by the movie The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which came out in like 1976. People who actually worked on the film, who I would think wouldn't want to admit that they like stole an idea, said that it was like presented by like some costume designer, whatever,
who may or may not have seen the other movie.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, like, I looked at both the images from each one, and it looks really similar. I think the Town That Dreaded Sundown, they had two eyes, but Jason only had the one. So Tom Savini is actually like really big in horror movie, like blood, makeup, design. He's an actor in some. I think he was in one of the Living Deads that we watched. Anyway, he wasn't available for this, so they went to Stan Winston to do like the gore and all that. The reason why I bring up Stan Winston is because he eventually won an award or an Oscar for James Cameron's Aliens.
Oh, nice. Full
Aliens
circle.
With an S. Yeah, so it's just kind of crazy how these iconic, movies are.
Yeah.
They got the backbone, by a lot of common people, and I like being, when I was in the band, I was the backbone of the band playing bass. So I have to, shout out to these boys. Another just kind of fun fact: they fought they had to do so much to make this not an X-rated movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like they had to cut out it seemed like anytime I was reading facts, they were like, yeah, they had to cut out this scene because of this, and they had to cut out this sex scene because the girl ended up being underage, and it was just like all these crazy things. Which also, the last one, it has an extremely long pre-credit sequence, which is 15 minutes.
Oh,
so
wow.
the movie is only an hour and 30 something minutes long.
Yeah.
And so you're down to an hour and 15 minutes after credits, which is I think kind of funny. But anyway, so those were the fun facts that I found out about the movie.
Awesome. So a lot of those actually go like straight into my notes about the movie. One thing that you talked about there was kind of that backbone of people who sort of make these like you have a lot of the same people influencing these big movies in a genre.
Right.
And I feel like there are a couple other movies that had a really, really strong impact on this one. And I'll save it for the end, but I'm curious if it comes up in our discussion if you saw the same things. But just to start off with, like, to me, this movie, and I don't know how much of it is, because they came out in the same year, they were sort of in the same, like, horror genre of slasher or what, or maybe it's just because I watched them both, 2 weeks in a row. Mm-hmm. But this movie and Halloween 2, to me, are very, like, closely linked in as far as, like, what they were trying to do and how they pulled it off. And it's really interesting to me that you said they had to fight so hard to keep this one from being X-rated, because I felt like this one was a lot milder than Halloween 2 as far as the gore.
Yeah, I would think that Halloween 2 probably had to do the same thing. But, well, to an extent, I mean, like, a guy gets a machete in his face and, like, goes off with it. So maybe those kind of things that would make it bad, but...
Yeah, and it just makes me really curious, like, what the uncut version of this one looked like based on what was able to get into Halloween 2. But
yeah, I would kill to watch, like, a lot of these, like, the original Halloween uncut or Halloween 2 uncut, Yeah. I think that would be pretty crazy.
Yeah. But anyway, so much like Halloween 2, I think this one was really trying hard to cash in on what made the previous one successful. Mm-hmm. This one actually came out a lot faster because... this came out just like the year after the previous one. Yeah. And from what I was reading, the initial idea for both this and Halloween was that they were going to be more like horror anthologies. So they didn't plan to carry over characters, but because those characters were so popular, they ended up doing it. And so I think that makes more sense in this context where it's like, oh, okay, well, in the first one, it was Mrs. Voorhees, and then you had Jason coming up out of the water at the end as, like, a kid. And then all of a sudden you have this one where like Jason's the villain, and it's like, well, I thought he was a child that lived in the lake. But they weren't originally meant to be like tied together. That was more of like an addition afterwards to kind of cash in on the first one's popularity. So I thought that was really interesting. But I do feel like this one had something that Halloween 2 didn't, in that it took place several years after the first one, and it was a different villain. So it wasn't quite just the same like rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. This is just like an extension of the first movie. It really did feel like its own kind of new and self-contained storyline, with the exception, of course, of like that first opening sequence.
Right.
But I thought it was an interesting challenge of like, we had the first movie and it was successful and it had the grand reveal at the end. Now we sort of loosely tied the story back to it. We want to keep a lot of the same, I guess, elements that made the first one popular, but also develop a new story and create a different villain.
Yeah, and I think it works out as long as you don't necessarily think about it too much. Like yeah. we could get into the story of it a little bit later, but yeah, I mean, I also read where they were eventually talking about like making it almost like a different Jason each time, like a different version of him. But yeah, I guess that's neither here nor there.
Well, and I liked it felt like it kept a lot of the same filming style, like as far as you were watching from like the next room over, or like from a hallway looking into a room, or from out the window. And we talked about this some with Halloween 2, where it was like, from seeing the previous movie, you had certain expectations about like when there was a certain camera style and music, you were seeing it from Michael's perspective. Well, in this one, it was kind of the same thing, where, you know, when you have this type of shot that's set up and the music going on in the background, you know that you're looking at the scene from the killer's perspective. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times that wasn't the case in this one. It was like they were deliberately setting you up to think that, and then it ended up being something else, like something more innocent. Mm-hmm. And so that was a way that they kind of kept you on your toes, or would like get you into a false sense of security before the real like scare happened. So I thought that was an interesting way of like playing off of your expectations from the first one. But all that to say, this movie felt very much like one that was made for the audience from Friday the 13th.
Yeah, I mean, that opening sequence alone like had probably like 4 of those where like they made you feel comfortable just to like make you freak out, and then nope, everything's fine. And then they, ends. Yeah, she dies.
Yeah, and we talked last time about how like weird it was in Halloween 2 that they basically just replayed the ending of the previous movie. Mm-hmm. And in this one, they did sort of a similar thing, but it was all presented like in the form of nightmares that she was having. Right. So you kind of got to see the same type of thing, but it was a way of tying a future dated storyline sort of back to those events. Yeah, and I definitely liked that they did the that recap, because it had been a while since we watched Friday the 13th, so just kind of recapping for us alone. But I'd wondered if they hadn't have done that and just added an extra 15 minutes of actual film, if it would have made a little bit more sense, like not more sense, but if you don't have to explain to the viewer that it really was Mrs. Voorhees in the first movie, maybe that would have helped out a little bit. But I'm saying helped out a little bit. It's a classic horror movie, so what do I know, but yeah. Well, and to me, I mean, like, to your point, the movie was less than an hour and a half, but it did still feel kind of long to me in some places.
At times, yeah, it did.
And I feel like, there was definitely more like story and character development in this one than in the first one, but it still felt like after it had established the formula, it lost momentum a little bit and kind of it was like, okay, I know what's coming. Let's get to where something new develops. And that's also coming from the perspective of having seen the first one and kind of knowing that already. But yeah. And then I guess two things. One was with the sound. I had a really hard time hearing a lot of the dialogue in this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like I think this one was, I believe, less than half the budget of Halloween 2. And I think that there were some areas where that stood out a little bit, like the sound and editing being a couple of them, where, it just wasn't like that polished final Hollywood product.
Yeah.
But as we've talked about before, that kind of works better for a lot of horror movies, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't catch that. I did notice that they didn't do like his iconic sound as much as I figured.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The choo 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 choo.
Yeah. In fact, it was probably just me not paying attention. But when I finally noticed it, I was like, "Oh right, come on,
yeah,
why don't you play that?" Yeah.
And then I guess one thing, like from a movie making perspective, that we don't talk about that often is like costuming and wardrobe. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say the clothing in this movie was just amazing all around.
Okay.
I mean, like the outfits that these people were in, and the fact that was like chosen for the movie, brilliant. Loved it. So 80s, and so just such a magnification of everything that was fashion in the 80s. I loved it, except for one part.
What the?
Jason's wardrobe, straight out of the late 90s, early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Those were Jinko jeans and Doc Martens.
Yeah, I know, man. What's funny is it was early 80s too when they had this dress style. So that's something. Trendsetters.
Yeah, exactly. It's what the decade became. So yeah. But yeah, all that said, who do you think would like this movie?
I mean, it's yet again, even though it's a part 2, I feel like it's still a classic. Like, I wonder what part, like when you get to a certain part, when it stops becoming a classic. Mm-hmm. But it's in the 80s and it's a slasher film, so I'm gonna like it. Yeah, you know what I mean. Yet again, any classic, any slasher horror fan. I think if you like Halloween Part 2 or Freddy Krueger or Friday the 13th, like obviously you're gonna like this one too. Like they didn't stray away so much that it's not, well, it takes away the lack of surprise. Like at the first one, you had that surprise aspect. Oh, it's Miss Voorhees,
I would say that this one had a little bit more like investigation, or like maybe a little bit more mystery than it had surprise overall. But I 100% agree. I feel like it's very, very much a classic slasher. And I would say that of the sequels that we've watched, this is probably at the top of my list as far as sequels that were fine and able to stand on their own as a movie. Yeah,
I agree with you.
How did you feel? So you said that you agree on that one, but did you like this one better than Halloween 2?
I would say better than Halloween 2 for sure. Mainly just because Halloween 2 almost just kind of bored me a little bit. I don't know why.
You think it kind of... And I was trying to figure that out too, because I felt like Halloween 2 didn't pull me in near as much. And I think that's just because it introduced a lot fewer unknowns. Like in Halloween 2, since it just picked up, it was just like the formula again. And they did some interesting things with the writing to make it a little less predictable and to kind of play on your expectations and stuff. But it really just felt like if I had sat down to watch that movie having not seen the first one, I don't think I would have gotten much out of it. And the issues with the plot that we talked about too.
Right.
This one I felt like stood on its own a lot better and had just enough variation by having like a different villain that it pulled me in a lot more, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were to pick, part 2, I feel like I could watch Friday the 13th and then immediately watch Friday the 13th Part 2. Yeah. Whereas like after watching Halloween Part 2, after reviewing it, let's watch Nightmare on Elm Street. Or something. I don't know, but I would just, it's a slight margin, but I would pick Friday the 13th Part 2 over that one. Yeah.
Cool.
For sure.
Well then, let's play the spoiler warning and get into the gory details.
Warning, warning, warning. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. This is your warning. Warning, warning, warning. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. This is your warning. If it's not obvious enough, warning.
side. We survived it.
Survive the suspense. Even though we kind of already said that Jason came back.
Yeah. So that's the first thing I want to talk about.
Right.
We're just acknowledging that doesn't make sense, right?
Absolutely not. I think everyone agrees that doesn't make sense.
Okay, good. Yeah, so
because the reason why it doesn't make sense is because if he was alive the whole time, why didn't he just go up to Mom in the first one and be like, "Hey, Mom, they didn't actually drown. I didn't drown.
Yeah,
I'm not actually dead.
How did
so you don't have to kill all these peeps."
How did he go from being like a child corpse that lived in the lake to being like a middle-aged man with poor clothing choices that lived in a shack in the woods? Like, what?
Yeah,
that was the first thing that really confused me when they stumbled across that shack. Like, I felt like Jason in the first one, you got the sense that he was almost like a supernatural being or like a demon that haunted the lake or something. Whereas in this movie, he was very much just a human.
Well, I think that. See, I kind of feel like the other way. I feel like if they were gonna make it work, then they would make it that he was more like supernatural. He was gonna see. I don't know actually, because they had to bring the mom aspect into the movie too, where like she told him, where she almost got away because of. But I don't know. I felt like they could have made it more supernatural. He came back to life or something and wanted to get revenge for his mom's death, or I don't know.
Yeah, or he had like possessed a maintenance man that was working there. Like I felt like there could have been a lot of things to make more sense that didn't happen.
Right.
But that's okay. It wasn't really supposed to be him in the first place anyway, so it's fine.
Or like add at the beginning of the movie, like when it was doing flashbacks, but like add that he actually did one of the killings of the people who were like the Indian guy who was in the cabin, or just something, but
anyhow, that said, what did you love or hate about this movie?
It's like I said, it's a slasher, so I'm gonna love it for the most part. It had like the annoying geeky dude who was kind of mild.
Yes,
he had his moments, but like sometimes they way overdo it.
Correct.
And this guy started to, and I feel like I gave him the look like, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then like you didn't see him again because they were all at the bar. But yeah, so I love that. I felt like this one was almost a little bit more suspenseful than the first one.
Yeah, I think so.
Like it had more like what's around the corner kind of things, like when they discover, like when the cop discovers the shed out there, like it's like, oh man, like he's close, like get out of there. But I feel like it had some suspense. I would say for the things I didn't like, it was probably obviously the story, that plot was obviously one, the plot line that was just kind of confusing. But like I've said with many horror films, it's sometimes the plot line doesn't matter. It's just like,
that's not what you're watching.
Give me the facts, give me the juice. So I mean, it had what we wanted. I mean, if you were a fan of Friday the 13th, like if you're a legit fan, I felt like if you watched this one, you'd be just as happy because it's basically the same concept, as in campers were getting killed by in the woods, basically.
Yeah, and it was a lot of the things that were beloved about the first one were very present in this movie as well. And so, but I guess that for my love, the one thing, and I already talked about it some in the movie making piece, but just like the way they use those elements from the first one to make you make assumptions that might not be true, like playing off that whole Jason is watching thing, and then like there's the scene where you're watching the girl counselor walking down the path, like from the trees, and then that slingshot gets pulled back and you're just waiting for it to like hit her in the back of the head or something super gory, and then it's just that dude flirting with her, and then when she's like out swimming and then someone takes the clothes and then she comes back, you're like just waiting for her to get cut up, and then it ends up being the other guy. Like there was just a lot of stuff like that where what you were waiting for or what was being set up was not the actual violence.
Yeah.
And then the violence came in much more like abruptly and unexpectedly in a lot of the movie. And so it kind of kept it interesting, and it kind of got it out of the exact formula of the first one. But then it did sort of establish a new formula that was, it was kind of tried and true by the time this one was over. But I like that it had a lot of the same feeling, but not so much exactly like the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing that I hated was just like the acting and dialogue, which, as you said, tends to be an issue with these movies. But there was one scene where Paul is sitting there, and it's towards the beginning where everybody's arrived, and then Jenny gets there late. And then Paul's like, Jenny, put your car in the lot, okay? This place is starting to look like a Burger King.
Yeah.
Is that our first recorded instance of like anti-product placement?
It probably was.
Like, what?
That's funny.
It's
I didn't
so
think about
random
that.
to me.
I bet like McDonald's paid them to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out, like, was it McDonald's or Dairy Queen that paid him to say that?
That's great.
Yeah, that's pretty good. But that was just kind of like typical of a lot of it, and like when they're at the bar later, and the one guy's sitting there with like an empty 12-pack in front of him, and yet he's still like coherent and talking. It's like, it's a goofy 80s movie. But not to the point that it was necessarily super distracting. Like, it didn't break you out of the feel that the movie was trying to establish for the most part. Like, you mentioned that guy was kind of subdued or downplayed by comparison to other movies, and I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, you also just wanted to be like, hey, man, are you sure that that's not non-alcoholic beer and they're pranking you or something?
Yeah.
Is that some Oklahoma beer that you're drinking there, bud?
Former Oklahoma beer.
Former. What can you do?
Yeah. So, what were some scenes that stood out to you?
So, I also have some confusion.
Okay.
So, the girl's dog is dead, right?
I didn't think so.
Well, I thought that's what was his name? Jeff? And... yeah, his name was Jeff. When Jeff and...
yeah. Because they found it when they were out where they weren't supposed to be. But...
maybe it wasn't the dog?
I don't know that you knew that for sure, I guess.
Oh, okay.
But maybe it was supposed to be, though.
Because, like, at the end of that scene, they walked off. They're like, are you going to tell her about it? They're like, no, not at all. Then they go
you're totally
rocks.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, so I kind of like the setup for the scene where the dog comes back and, like, it's like... the music's super happy, and like they think that Jason's gone, and like I don't know, like it's just super happy, everything's going good, like everything's fine.
It's like the flowery music too,
right,
like the Disney movie ending. Very cheerful.
And then all of a sudden Jason comes through the window and like pulls her out. But anyway, so like I really like that scene. I thought that was great. I think this is known too, but it's like what happened to Paul, like because Jason didn't kill him, so it's like what actually happened to him. And, and at the end of the movie, she's saying like, "Where's Paul?" And it's like, actually, wait, where is Paul? Like, Anyway,
I have lots of questions about that part, but we'll get to it.
About the ending part? Yeah. So I really like that. I liked when if they were gonna add the obsession Mrs. Voorhees with Jason, like she was so obsessed with his quote unquote death that she was going to kill all these campers, then I like that they added that with him. He almost had like a shrine to her. Or not almost. He had a shrine to her in his cabin. So when she goes into I'm saying cabin, but little shack, when she goes in there and realizes the shrine, and I like that scene because it kind of shows that he's like, even though killing people's not legit crazy, that's sarcasm. I really like that. And then I thought with some of the deaths that they did was kind of interesting. They had the double impalement. Which if you ever, they don't show it in the movie, like the actual, they show it like hitting the ground and what it insinuates, but there's a picture on the back of the VHS tapes that's the double impalement. You can actually see it, which is kind of crazy to look at. But I kind of feel bad for the guy who did like the special effects, because I feel like all the stuff that got cut out was like his stuff.
All the really good stuff.
I could have 2 Oscars.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I think those were the ones that stuck out to me. I mean, as far as, it's almost like the Nightmare on Elm Street, though. Anytime Jason was kind of involved, it was just kind of interesting.
Yeah,
that they were able to they were able to build the atmosphere of some scenes, like when the girl skinny dip, and like you had talked about, gets out, clothes are missing. He could die. She could, be killed by him, but it's not him. They created that atmosphere with those. So I think that was more so what I enjoyed was that.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love the intro sequence. I thought that was a great setup for the rest of the movie, because you came into it with that expectation from the first movie, and then there kept being the fakes until she opens the refrigerator and she sees Mrs. Voorhees' head, and then she gets stabbed from behind. And then it like cuts to the intro, which was super 80s, but it says like Friday the 13th, and then there's like the explosion, and it says part 2. And that was so, I don't know, just such a good like setup for what this movie was. I really liked that sequence, even though it wasn't really tied much to the rest of the movie. I thought it was good. And then another scene that really stood out was when Jason was hiding in the bed with his pillow face mask on. Mm-hmm. And the girl jumps back, and then you see the other guy dead in the background, and then the camera is like right above that raised knife, and then you see her get stabbed. That was such like a good, I don't know, throwback to like everything you kind of love about those. And it really reminded me of the first Halloween movie, when the girl is in the house at the end and sees like the other people that have been killed and stuff.
Yeah.
But then the other part was like when Ginny and Paul get back from the bar, and they go in the cabin, and then Paul like starts wrestling with Jason. It was interesting to me because that was the first time anyone had really put up a fight. Right. And it was also the first time that it let you know that he was like real. Like a physical person and not a ghost or something. Because especially the way they did that transition from the first movie, that wasn't super clear until that point. And so then they get into the big fight and everything, and then they manage to knock him out, and then they reach down to pull off the mask, and I was just like, dang it, Bryce is going to be so pissed when they show his face. Yeah. But then they didn't. So I thought that was like really a really good choice. Like the easy thing would have been to just show it and answer the question, but the fact that they didn't, kind of left you wanting more as the audience, and then definitely set up that the real ending scene to be a lot more effective, I thought. Yeah.
What if they did this movie where it was like the dad who was like obsessed with killing both of them? No, that would have been pretty funny.
The
Took
dad?
Off like if it was just the dad, because you had to deal with Mrs. Voorhees. This one was Mr. Voorhees.
Jason's dad, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be funny.
Yeah.
Next would have been a cousin.
Yeah. Right, it's just the extended Voorhees.
Grandpa,
each time, yeah. So one thing, too, I guess, the only other scene before we get into the ending part was the death scene that I disliked the most was when the guy in the wheelchair died. Because I feel like life had already dealt him a bad hand.
And he's super positive.
He was great. Yeah. He was the only one I didn't want to see die for the most part. Yeah. Just because, like, being a type 1 diabetic, if I ever found, like, life is already, like, I already drew the short straw once. If I ever found myself in an abandoned summer camp being hunted by a serial killer, do you know how pissed I'd be at the universe? Yeah. Like, everything. Like, you don't draw 2 bad straws. Like, anyway.
Well, that's why you should just start training, man. Just start preparing to be attacked at all times.
Oh, I thought you were going to say to become a serial killer.
Or, wait, I wasn't done. Or prepare.
Well, I think I'll say no to both of those, and I'm just not going to go to summer camp.
YMCA offers free karate classes. I know this for a fact. I almost signed up for it. Yeah. But then I was older than the instructor and decided to back out.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so the ending, that part where they think they've defeated him, they're back at the cabin, like, recuperating, and then they hear something, they go and they open the door, and the dog's there, and the music totally changes, and it's like the happy Disney ending. And then Jason just comes flying through the window and attacks Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
But then it like fades to black, and then you see her wake up on a stretcher.
Yeah.
So it seemed like he had the opportunity to kill her, but he didn't. We don't know what happened to Paul, and I had no idea how to interpret that.
Yeah, you wonder if it's just like a we ran out of money, so we're just going to stop kind of thing. It didn't make too much, but it who knows? I mean, you know, as far as this one, as far as just part 2 goes, and the ending, you know, not knowing anything else about the other parts, who knows? I mean, maybe Paul showed up at the hospital or something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that scene was great. It just, in the larger storyline, I wasn't really sure exactly how it fit.
Yeah.
Which actually had kind of some nice continuity to basically the same thing happening at the end of the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, leaving one survivor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's also strange that like no one else. So like it was getting like to Paul and Jenny, like there was only a few minutes left. I was like, wait, what about all those other people that were just left at the bar, stayed out? You know, like they would have a lot more people to be killing right now, or at least they could overpower him or something.
Yeah, like the funny guy.
Yeah, I mean, he would have died for sure.
Oh yeah,
but he probably died from alcohol poisoning.
Yeah, I was gonna say he was like 16 beers in, he might have died on his own. But anyway.
Or he became the new Crazy Ralph.
Or he became the new Jason. Guess we'll just have to watch part 3 and find out
next year, buds.
Yeah. So do you want to guess what 2 movies I felt like super influenced this one?
I'm gonna say music-wise, an Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Nailed it. So I had Psycho as one of the 2, and one was because of the music, and especially there in the beginning, where during like those opening credits, I think it was in the opening credits where they play the choo 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 ha 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 ha, but they also have like the crazy violins.
Yeah,
that made me think of it a lot, but also like the mom obsession.
Yeah,
and sort of like the mom shrine, and just like that psychological aspect of it. I thought that was really interesting, and sort of how that like inspired someone to basically be a slasher. I thought that I felt like throughout the movie, because I had written down in my notes like that the music reminded me of that in the opening, and then I like saw so many more similarities as the movie went along. So I thought that was cool. But do you want to guess the other one?
Yep, I do. Was it Hush?
Nope. Nice try.
Gosh. Cabin in the Woods.
No. Texas Chainsaw. Because like it had kind of that small town vibe for a lot of it, and like that creepy small town vibe. And then they're at that bar later with the country band, and then he's wearing Pillowface instead of Leatherface. And then there's like the chainsaw, and there was a kid in a wheelchair. Like it just, there were a lot of elements in this movie that I was like, oh yeah, that was in Texas Chainsaw.
That's
too.
A good call. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all I had. Do you have anything else before we get into the what have you been listening to segment?
I don't think I do. I enjoyed this movie, obviously. No, I really don't. Nope.
All right then. So, what have you been listening to?
So this week, specifically because I like to support Oklahoma, I've been listening to Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots.
Oh, yeah.
By the Flaming Lips. Because you have Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots Part 1, and that's like one of the greatest songs of all time. But it also has like Do You Realize, which is like catchy and on every commercial.
Yeah.
But like, I really like the Yoshimi Battles Pink Robots Part 1. Like, I love that song.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I listened to that, and I never really listened to him that much. So I was thoroughly impressed with. I mean, like, I listened to just specific songs, but now I'm trying to listen, to whole albums, and it's like, oh man, this stuff's actually like pretty good. But
yeah, they put on the craziest live show.
That's what I heard. I was talking to my buddy about it, and he had seen them live and was talking about just like the whole time people go there dressed up, and confetti's going off all the time, and Wayne gets out on an inflatable ball and goes out to the crowd, and I would love to see them live if they're still playing. I don't know if they are. They started in like 1985 or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
they've been around a long time. We saw them in Omaha, but that's been probably 5 years ago now. But it was like a big festival type show,
okay.
and like I feel like that's what they're optimized for. It was a really good one. But yeah,
it was very good album. Highly recommend it.
So speaking of festivals, this past weekend we went to Austin City Limits, and while we were there, we saw Blood Orange.
Yep.
And I'm not
very surprised about that.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't love it.
I am not surprised about that at all.
It was like all new stuff, and just not like a lot of energy in the stage show. Like it wasn't my type of show, I guess, and it was kind of weird in that environment.
Did he have a good crowd?
Yeah, good. There were a lot of people, but having seen that, it really took me back to my old days of stomping around with you in Northeast Oklahoma and listening to some Lightspeed Champion.
Oh, God.
So that's what I have been all about for the last several days. Yeah. And Dev Hines is just a wildly creative and talented person. And so the stuff that he did with Lightspeed Champion is a little bit more guitar oriented, I guess, and less kind of R&B-ish. Yeah. And so I think the song Midnight Surprise is probably just like a really good encapsulation of what the band is or was. I guess they're not still playing, but
it's like a 30-minute song.
Yeah, it goes on a long time, but it almost feels more like a composition than a song, if that makes sense. You know, it has a lot of different parts and they flow and there are strings and it's just really good. So that's what I've been on. Yeah,
that always reminds me of my getting my wisdom teeth taken out, because you gave me the Life is Sweet, Nice to Meet You album.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right when I got that, which has Deadhead Blues, which is really good.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening. The death scene that I disliked the most was when the guy in the wheelchair died. Because I feel like life had already dealt him a bad hand.
And he's super positive.
He was great. Yeah. He was the only one I didn't want to see die for the most part. Yeah. But I was just thinking, you know, because putting myself in his shoes a little bit, like, because I'm a type 1 diabetic. And
or like his wheels, more so.
That is like not okay.
Put yourself in his wheel.
No, I saw what you did there. That's not okay. Oh my gosh.
Oh, just saying.
I was going to try and get through it and take the moral high road, and that didn't work. So
good.